Hello everybody and welcome back to Reading with Grandma. We're going on another fairy tale adventure today. We've read a few of the stories if you've been following the videos, and today we're going to start with Hansel and Gretel. And then continue on, I believe the next story is Sleeping Beauty. Hansel and Gretel lived with their parents in a tiny cottage at the edge of the forest. Their father was a simple woodcutter, and although he worked hard, the family was very poor. Many times Hansel and Gretel had nothing but a crust of bread for their supper. At night, after Hansel and Gretel were in their beds, their parents would talk in worried voices. Even though they whispered, Hansel and Gretel could hear what they said. "What is to become of us?" asked Father one night. "Soon we will not have enough money even for our flour." "We will manage," the mother said. "I must go to the forest to find work," Father said. "Otherwise we will surely starve." Mother gasped. "There must be some other way," she replied anxiously. Then she calmed herself. "We will find some. We will find one. Now let's get some rest." "Hansel, we can't let Father go," whispered Gretel to her bed. "What can we do?" "I will travel into the forest instead," said Hansel. "Then I will come with you," said Gretel bravely. "The forest is very dangerous. You may need my help." "Very well," said Hansel. "We will leave tonight." Before daylight, Hansel and Gretel had crept out of their beds and pulled on their clothes. Gretel collected some bread from the kitchen and stuffed it into her pockets. "I suppose it is not such a bad idea for you to come along," Hansel told Gretel as they took their last look at their house and began walking into the dark forest. The children walked silently. They walked all day long through the tangled brush and tall trees. They walked until their feet hurt and their legs felt tired and heavy. "I did not realize the forest was so big," Gretel said. "Neither did I," said Hansel. "But don't worry, I have made sure we will not get lost. I left a trail of breadcrumbs behind us in case we need to turn back." "You are very clever, Hansel," Gretel laughed. "Why do you laugh?" Hansel said. "I have sacrificed my bread to help us." "Look," Gretel said, pointing behind them. 3 blackbirds hopped along, carefully eating each breadcrumb Hansel had dropped. The trail Hansel had left for them had vanished completely. "Hansel, here, eat some," Gretel said, trying to comfort her brother. She held out a piece of bread to him. "I am not hungry any more," Hansel said. By now the children were very tired. They continued to walk through the forest. Surely they would come across some place they could rest, or someone who could give them something small to eat. They were certainly lost now, and it felt as though they were walking in circles. Night fell upon the forest, and strange noises came from behind the trees. Hansel and Gretel sat down and huddled against the cold. "Did you hear that?" asked Hansel, reaching for Gretel's hand. "It's only an owl," Gretel whispered. "We should try to sleep now." Soon the children were asleep, dreaming of a warm supper. In the morning they continued to walk. At first, to make the time pass, they sang songs that their parents had taught them. Soon they grew tired and hungry again, and walked along in silence. After a while the children entered a clearing. They could not believe their eyes. "Gretel, look!" Hansel shouted. "A cottage!" "Maybe whoever lives there will give us something to eat," said Gretel eagerly. As the children hurried closer, they saw it was no ordinary cottage. Its houses were made of gingerbread. Its walls were made of gingerbread, and the windows of clear sugar. "It is the most beautiful house I have ever seen," said Gretel. "It is the most delicious house I have ever seen," said Hansel, and he began to break off some frosting to eat. "Wait!" Gretel cried. "We should see if anyone is home and ask before we eat." The children knocked at the door. After a moment it opened and an old woman came out. "Hello," the woman said sweetly. "We have been traveling through the forest," Gretel said. "We are very tired and hungry. May we rest here?" The old woman invited the children inside. She prepared them a meal of pancakes with rich syrup. Then she showed the 2 of the beds that were covered with soft down. But in the morning, as the children woke up, the old woman grabbed Hansel and locked him in a cage. "She is a witch!" Hansel cried from inside the cage. "That's right," the witch shouted. "I am a witch, and you will be my supper once you are good and fat." For the next few weeks, the witch made sure Hansel had plenty to eat. Gretel was only given crust of bread. Each morning, the witch would stand by Hansel's cage and say, "Stick out your finger so I can see how plump you are." But Hansel was clever. He knew that witches cannot see very well. Instead of his finger, he would stick out a thin little chicken bone that Gretel had managed to pass him secretly. The witch would say, feeling the chicken bone. "What a scrawny thing you are! You must eat more." The witch would yell at poor Gretel to bring Hansel more food. One morning, the witch ordered Gretel to fetch some water. "Whether Hansel is lean or fat," she said, "today I will cook and eat him. I have waited long enough." "No!" Gretel shouted. "You stubborn child, do as I say," the witch demanded impatiently. But Gretel would not move. The witch nudged Gretel up to the oven. "Check the oven to make sure it is hot enough." Gretel knew better than to trust the old witch. "No," Gretel said, "I don't know how to check." "Then I will do it myself," shouted the witch. She shoved Gretel aside. Then she hobbled over to the oven and poked her head inside. Just as she did, Gretel gave her a quick push. The witch fell right into the oven. Gretel quickly slammed the iron door and bolted it so the witch could not get out. "I told you that you would need my help," Gretel said as she opened the door of Hansel's cage. Hansel sprang out and hugged her. With nothing else to fear, the children sat down and enjoyed a feast of cookies, fresh bread, and candies. Before they left the cottage, the children gathered food enough to eat for their journey home. As they wandered through the house searching for food, Hansel and Gretel discovered boxes of pearls and precious stones. The children stuffed their pockets with jewels and filled their large sacks with as many cakes and candies and cookies as they carried. "Let's hurry home," Gretel said. "I am sure Mother and Father are dreadfully worried by now." The children set off through the forest without a trail to lead them. As they walked, they fed the birds with crumbs and sang happily. After days of walking, the children came to a place in the woods that looked familiar. Suddenly they could see their own little cottage throughout the trees. The children began to run. "Mother, Father, we are home at last," they shouted joyfully. When Mother and Father heard their calls, they ran to meet them. They hugged Hansel and Gretel for a very long time. "Look what we have brought," said Hansel. He took the jewels from his pockets and laid them on the table. "We will never be hungry again. You are very, very good children," said Father, "and very brave. But you must promise me that you will never go into the forest again, for it is a dangerous place." Hansel and Gretel looked at each other and smiled. "We promise," they said together. And that ends our story of Hansel and Gretel. We will begin now with Sleeping Beauty. There was once a beloved queen who, after many childless years, gave birth to a beautiful daughter. The queen's loyal subjects prepared a festival to welcome the baby princess. Deep in the dark forest of the same kingdom, there lived a wicked witch who led a lonely life. "Bah!" cried the bitter witch. "I'll put a stop to all those cheers." With evil in her heart, the witch set out for her castle. The moment she arrived, the cruel witch cast a terrible spell on the princess. "On the princess' 16th birthday," hissed the witch, "she will prick her finger. This will cause her to fall into a deep sleep, from which she will never awaken." The queen gasped. Holding her baby close, she whispered, "I promise to do my best to keep you safe." 16 years later, the princess prepared for her birthday party. She noticed a tiny rip in her dress and decided to mend it herself. But as she stitched, the princess pricked her finger on the sharp needle. As the witch predicted, the princess at once fell into a deep sleep. The queen was horrified to find her daughter fast asleep on the floor of the sewing room. She knew at once what had happened. The prince was brought to the room The princess was brought to her own room and put to bed. The devastated queen summoned all of the best doctors, witches, and warlocks to the castle, but they were unable to reverse the spell. One day a fairy arrived at the castle to see the sleeping princess. The fairy sat with the girl for a long time, whispering comforting words into her ear. "I have news about your daughter," the fairy queen told the queen. In her travels, the fairy had met a bitter old witch who bragged about her powerful spells. The sneering witch had mentioned the one thing that could break her formidable sleeping spell. "True love," the fairy told the queen. "It is if a man of pure heart falls in love with the princess, she will awaken from her sleep." "What man would fall in love with a sleeping girl?" asked the queen, sighing. "All hope is surely lost." "I cannot awaken your daughter," the fairy said solemnly. "The witch's magic is too powerful. But there is something I can do." "To bring you comfort," continued the fairy, "I can cast a spell on you and your subjects, so that you may all share the prince's slumber. When the princess awakens, so, too, will you." The queen sat deep in thought. "I agree to this plan," she answered finally. "Now, kind fairy, cast your spell on me and my people." As quickly as an eyelid flutters shut, the queen and everyone else in the castle settled into a deep sleep. Over the years, the castle courtyards had become overgrown. After 100 years had passed, a dense forest had grown all around the silent castle. One day a young handsome prince was riding his horse through the forest. In the thicket of brambles he glimpsed a stone wall. Cautiously the prince went closer. "A hidden castle?" he exclaimed. The prince cleared away vines and found a doorway. Then he noticed that at his feet a guard lay sound asleep. When the guard would not awaken, the prince decided to enter the castle and investigate. The prince walked through the great hall, finding more sleeping people with every step. "Wake up!" he shouted, but it was no use. Everyone slept soundly. Soon the prince came to the princess's room. "She is beautiful," he whispered. The prince gazed at her face, so peaceful and lovely. Overcome with emotion, the prince stepped to the girl's bedside. He lifted her hand and gently kissed it. At the prince's love, the princess' eyes opened in a flash. She looked with wide eyes at the young man sitting beside her. "It's you," she said. "You have come to me at last. I waited for you in my dream. A kind fairy told me you would come." At the same moment the princess awakened, so did the queen and her sleeping subjects. The queen rushed into the princess's room. "My daughter," she said, overjoyed, "you have come back to me." The queen looked at the prince. He was the man of pure heart whom the fairy had described. "Thank you," she said, embracing him. "You have saved my daughter and my kingdom." As the people throughout the castle woke from their slumber, they rubbed the sleep of 100 years from their eyes. The queen's joyful cries soon reached their ears. Everyone hurried to see the princess. "Our princess is awake!" they cheered, already celebrating. The queen introduced her subjects to the prince. "This man loves my daughter," said the queen, "and they will be married as soon as possible. We have waited a long time for this day. Let's not waste another moment." In a few short days the sound of wedding bells rang throughout the kingdom. The prince and princess were married in the grandest ceremony imaginable. The prince, his heart filled with love, had never been happier. The princess had truly found the man of her dreams, and they lived happily ever after. And that is the end of our lovely journey for today. I hope you enjoyed our stories. Leave me a comment below if you like them, and please hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and if you ring the bell, you'll be notified when I am going to be reading another adventure. So enjoy and open every book you can. Enjoy it all your life. Reading is a wonderful thing to do. Have a good day. Bye.